All right. Do we have any UHCL Hawks in the house? Gotta make a little bit more noise than that. UHCL Hawks, you're here. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. All right, let's give a big, not small, but big UHCL Hawks applause for the steel band players over here. I know how much we appreciate that. And we ain't heard nothing like that today. I don't know about you, I hadn't heard that today. Thank you all so much for joining us, and yeah, I appreciate you all stayed with it and didn't give up on us as you were traveling the road and everything. Next on the agenda, we have a presentation. Are we ready? Everything systems go? Okay, my friend and colleague who was at the first African Summit and who is returning here today to give us a little bit of an educational overview. The main reason we're here is to talk about issues that are relevant. And so we're going to have our first presenter, Ms. Carole Sylvers, will be joining us here shortly. And Carole, I'll let you come on up and introduce yourself and go ahead and get started. Ms. Carole Sylvers, everyone.
How's everybody today? Alrighty, we're just going to go through these. Alright, this is a topic on the Black family. I'm sure most of you have heard of this topic before. It's somewhat controversial. It's something that is an ever evolving topic. And so I'm just going to go through these slides with you, this information. It is, there's a lot more to it. You would have to take my class in order to get all of the details. But I kind of just touched on a couple of key points on this. So I'm going to get started with this first slide. The African diaspora is dispersing or scattering of continental Africans across the world, for those of you that don't know, and the birthplace of mankind, of course, is Africa. Many of you are familiar with this. I'm not going to read this, word for word, but you can see some of the points that I'm starting to, lay the foundation for my, for the understanding, a better understanding of the Black family. Next slide. The geographic regions of the African diaspora. You can see, to be that dark. Is this better for everybody?
No, that's if I can read that.
Okay. Well, whatever. If you could darken the front and leave the back lit, that might be a little bit better. But these are the geographic areas that cover the African diaspora, going from Africa to, of course, to South America. The four main ethnic groups of Africa are, and these are main groups, would be the Bantu, the Maghrabian, the Neolithic, and the Twa. Most of us are familiar with West Africans from the western part, unless fewer of us are aware of the Maghrabian population, which would be the northwestern part of Africa, and then the Neolithic, again, that would be east of the Nile, and then the Twa. The Twa you might be more familiar with the name pygmy. We really don't use the word pygmy because it is a diminutive term. It actually is a measurement, which is on a, it's a pejorative term. The concept of race is not a scientific term, of course. It changes over time. It changes with its meaning with different populations. It changes with the more information or exposure we get to people, get with people from other cultures. So my point is that it's not a scientific term. And I give an example of the British, who thought of the Celtic people and the Scots as a different race of people, and it really is not. Then we're going to go into the one-drop theory, and in the country of the United States, particularly in the Protestant nations that were colonized by the British, you have the one-drop theory, which is, and how many are familiar with the one-drop theory, by the way? Okay, so no matter what amount of African blood you have, you would be defined as black. Well, the case study of Susie Guillory Phipps is that she is 1/32 black African American because of her grandparent that could be traced back to being an African slave. She wanted to change her race to white, and the courts would not allow her to do that. So they did allow her to, legally change it to other. And how many of you are familiar with this case study with Susie Phipps? Oh, just one person? Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. Louisiana. She's from Louisiana. There's a lot of things going on in Louisiana too, which differ from the rest of the United States, but we don't have time to go into that at this point. This one-drop theory is the opposite in Latin nations. And so what the one-drop theory does in Latin nations is that it identifies you by your Iberian ancestry. And so with this, you get these different names from Peninsulares, Criollo, and this also includes where you were born, includes your religion as well, and all of these different terms to define what race one would be. And we see in this country it would be considered complex, but if you're from those regions, it's not complex because you've been exposed to it, you're born into it, and it really is no different here in the United States, except if you look at it with light skin and dark skin. It's just that these are all legal terms in Iberian nations, and in the United States, if you would have the same the same type of ancestry. In this country, it's a dichotomous racial identification. One is either black or white. Okay. With me so far? In Latin America, one is neither black nor white. Now that doesn't mean that there is an egalitarian racial harmony, anything like that. But in terms of how they identify themselves, it's not the same as in the United States. So again, they're going to identify themselves based on the amount of Iberian ancestry as opposed to African ancestry. And in my class, if you go back to that slide, in my class, one of the students says, well, actually a couple of the students had said, well, do they know? Don't they know better? Don't they know that they're not right, that they're missing it? And my thoughts on that, comments on that would be, well, who's right and who's wrong? Is it from a different perspective? And again, going back to the concept of race, there's only one race, and that is the human race. Physical appearance, of course, is your phenotype, and this is what some people refer to as race. We've got a group of people in the South Pacific that are Negroid people in the sense that they came from the continent of Africa, several hundreds of years ago. But they have blonde hair, and they have blue eyes, or green eyes, but they had not intermingled with the European population. They just came from the continent of Africa with blonde hair, wavy hair, still Negroid, but they did not miscegenate. So where do we put those people? And by the way, if we're going to define race the way it is defined in the United States, their genetic composition is going to be closer to the population, genetic makeup, is going to be similar to those of the Far East than it would be Africa. The genetic makeup for African Americans, at least I'll say, not only in Africa, but in New World societies, is going to be closer to the Europeans. So again, what is this thing as race? The French, now we're going to go into different slave systems, okay, because I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit. The French colonial system, their slave laws were based on Roman laws. It was created by the French government. Slaves were not property. Now that doesn't mean that they were necessarily treated any better, but at least on the books, they were not property. Legal marriage was encouraged. It was encouraged by the priest. Wherever you had a larger percentage or presence of priests is when you would get a higher percentage of marriage if you could afford to pay the priest to perform the ceremony. And again, on the books, it was illegal to split families. Doesn't mean that families were not split up, but if we go back to the data, the frequency would have been much less than what it was here in the United States, or at least under British colonial law. Okay. In the Iberian nations, you have the siete partidas, literally 7 parts, again based on Roman law. Again, legal marriage encouraged. Slaves were not property. They were not chattel. Again, not property. So this is very different because, in terms of the concept of the United States, because the 13th, 14th, or at least, I'm sorry, the 14th and 15th Amendment have no meaning in these other nations, meaning, emancipation, yes, but the right to vote and the right to be recognized as citizens, they were already citizens under Roman law. That doesn't mean that they weren't, they were treated equally, but if you kind of follow where I'm going in this concept of, equal protection under the law, and et cetera, there is no concern for that on the same level it is in the United States. So when these people migrate to the United States, they may not be aware of the importance of the civil rights movement, at least the way it's structured here in the United States, and why it's important to get people to get registered to vote, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Go back, I'm sorry. Anti-miscegenation laws were established much later on, and it was to prevent an uprising of the unification of the slaves and the miscegenated populations. In the Protestant nations, anti-miscegenation laws took place almost from the very beginning, and some of them are still on the books in this country today. All right. British colonial system, again, slaves were property, they could be sold, and this is more of what you're used to, at least in the United States. This is more of what you're accustomed to. So when you encounter people, Afro populations, Pan-Africans from other parts of the world, they may not consider themselves black, okay, but this should give you an understanding, a better understanding of why they don't consider themselves black. They are not black in the sense that it is in the United States. The term black has a cultural meaning. All right. Now the emergence of images, going into the images that we find in the preserved literature. Literature about slave families, was, of course, written from an ethnocentric perspective. Particularly with women, the focus was on an inferior economic and sexual role. Okay, again, you're familiar with that. The reason was to increase the profit of the slaveholder. And then out of this, you get the comparison of Pan-African women, all black women, whether slaves, whether miscegenated, mulatto, whatever they're called in whatever nation. You got this myth of the strong black woman because of the association with animals. And when I present this word strong, this term strong black women to people that have never heard it for the first time, and going back to why women like activists such as Angela Davis, et cetera, Barbara Bush's son, not the former First Lady, but the scholar of the Caribbean, going back to the literature starting with the Spanish Inquisition, 1492, that is when we begin to see the word strong, an animal, associated with black women. So we know that it is not a badge of honor, that this was an insult, that they saw these women as no more than animals. The perceived deficiency of the black family. From this strong black woman, this image, this misperception, this misunderstanding, you get an image of a matriarch, which is literally a female-headed household. Okay, so what has happened was with this is the meaning has evolved over time. It was highlighted, spotlighted during the Moynihan report, which I'll get into at in the next slide. But the black male is intermittently a part of the family. He may not be there at all. The black family in the United States is viewed as inherently deficient. And many of these perceptions are the result of many of our public policy and public law. And the discrimination and racism that are involved in these deficiencies are not addressed at all. It's the only thing that is focused on in many of these studies when they review, when they conduct these studies among the poverty. They're not looking at the other factors that contribute to some of these things that you may see, some of these misunderstandings. They're just not looking at it more carefully, getting a better understanding. And so this negative image has been applied to the general African American or Pan-African population at large in the United States. Okay, the images of the slave woman, of all black women, was that they were equal to men in the fields. They were viewed as animals, which I mentioned before. They were muscular, but more importantly, they were considered unfeminine. The images of the European woman is that she was delicate and frail and beautiful and soft and feminine and in need of protection. And she was very naive, so therefore she needed someone to take care of her. Very different from the African American woman. Okay, the responses to these historical images, these negative historical images, we can see the A is that the black activists and scholars saw a strong need to declare black women as equal to white women. Therefore, the term womanism is a term that is applied to black feminists. There are some other issues that are involved in that we don't have time to get in right now, but again, womanism would be a term that would be applied to black women who want to or see a need to address this, these negative images and still be considered womanly, still be considered feminine, and still, again, be considered as a woman, as opposed to an animal. African American family unit, you can see here, and again, this is a misinterpretation of what Moynihan understood. Now, he is the late Senator Patrick Moynihan, Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And again, I stress senator because he was responsible, along with others, for developing the war on poverty, for developing many of these social programs that affect African Americans in this country. But many of these programs don't work. A lot of these programs don't work because they're not looking at the total picture. They're only looking at the manifestation of a segment and applying it to all, and it doesn't work. Okay? So again, discrimination, employment, job training, follow through, all these factors are just not addressed to the degree that they need to be addressed when it comes to public policy. Okay. Historical family unit of the African American is going to include the extended families, the fictive, okay, the kinship families where other people are brought into the kinship network because there's not enough of your bloodline family members, consanguineal bloodline, to help out. So you bring people into your family who you trust, et cetera, and they help give you the support that you need. Women are more likely to work outside of the home. This started back in the fields. Then after emancipation, it was domestic work that black women were relegated to, and other low-paying positions. Men, again, were less likely to have, to be more in the lower-paying positions. And 2 incomes were needed to keep this population above the poverty line. One other thing, I'm sorry, let me go back to that last slide. This last bullet, masculinity among Pan-Africans is not based on the economic dependence of women upon men. So in many other cultures it is, but it isn't because you've got a little bit more economic independence among Pan-African women, even if they are making, not making, a lot of, even if their income is limited, but they still have a little bit more of that independence and will contribute to the household. Summary, some of the things that we need to do is, that as a nation that is look at the total picture, consider oppression, not using it as an excuse, but look at the whole picture and address some of these issues. We need to, as a nation and public policy, not focus on one segment of the population, that they don't have this because they're poor, because they're black, because there's no family structure as they would see it, but we need to address the real reason, the bottom line. And that is, we need to look at the economic obstacles that are faced and the educational obstacles that are faced by these populations, and give these people give us all the opportunity to just to rise above, to deal with, I don't know how to say what I want to say, confront the oppression and deal with it. Not using it as an excuse, but let's learn to rise above it, et cetera, so that we can all become on an equal playing field. And I think that's about it.
How's everyone doing? All right. It's about 6:42, and I have one person I see missing that I'm looking for. That means they've gone to get some more food for us, so we're not quite ready for that part just yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to proceed next on our program, which I think someone has borrowed the program from here, but that's all right. I believe next up, I have the young lady who's very talented and who I've been encouraging since open mic in February to please come to the mic again and share your gift with us. We have a very good poet right here from UH Clear Lake, Miss Belinda Marshall. And if you noticed earlier, she was up here getting a little African dance going on and everything. I don't know if you're gonna get the African dance or not, but there's gonna be a poem involved. And I'd like for you all to welcome Miss Belinda Marshall.
Thank you. Well, this poem is actually a song written by India Arie. Some of you might have heard it. It's called I Am Not My Hair. A little girl with